Hi, Shannon again. When I was a little kid, every Friday my parents would take us to Blockbuster Video. I'd get to help pick out a movie, and we would all watch it together. When I think of the way an average person might look at movies, I'm brought back to the way our Blockbuster was organized. Like around the outer wall, you had all the new releases, but of greater variety and interest were the aisles. The selection was mainly organized by genre. Like, here's the horror, here's the action, here's the drama, here's the comedy. And kind of conflated with genre and shoehorned in were some other categories. If you were lucky, maybe you got a classics for older films and a foreign where all the non-US releases were lumped together. Netflix and other services still use a similar system, albeit with a lot more nuance and personalization. My Netflix mobile uses pretty much the exact same categories our Blockbuster did in the late 90s though. Genre is certainly a useful way to organize movies and a valuable tool. To only look at movies that way though, action, drama, comedy, horror, classic, foreign, is very, very reductive. So in addition to genre and two other categories that essentially amount to old and not American, I want to talk about some other means of classification you might not be as familiar with. First off, if you hear an academic talking about form or formal qualities in reference to film, they're referring to stuff like sound, editing, framing, lighting, and cinematography. The term mise-en-scène refers to the visual elements of a film's form as opposed to its sound elements.
It's a visual medium, man. Enough with this My Dinner with Andre. I mean, has this dude even heard of mise-en-scène? Put some information up in the frame, bitch.
Every Frame a Painting is explicitly a web series about film form. It explores everything from movement and shot composition to, in a great recent episode, how films use chairs. Generally, you can look at film form in opposition to film content, with form being the system a film uses to communicate its content, like a narrative, to you as a spectator. Two films with the same subject matter or similar narratives could have very different form. A film with inconsistencies between formal choices and the narrative, or formal choices and the intended effect on the audience, would be jarring.
I did not hit her. It's not true. It's bull. I did not hit her. I did not. Oh, hi, Mark.
Oh, hey, Johnny, what's up?
Sometimes this is used intentionally, like for comedic effect.
¿Qué es lo que tengo que saber?
Airplane took a type of movie that took itself very seriously, the airplane disaster film, and exploited that seriousness. Airplane may share formal similarities with films like Airport, but its content is a world apart.
Sir, excuse me, sir. I'm sorry I have to wake you. You a doctor?
That's right.
You could take formal qualities from one era, silent film, and apply them to a film from a completely different era, like, say, a great 80s action film. Contrapuntal sound is a term for a juxtaposition between soundtrack and what happens on screen. Incongruity between form and content for an effect. A really easy and common example is the torture scene from Reservoir Dogs. And instead of showing that, I'm going to show you a part of one of my favorite YouTube videos.
How did you get out?
I shot my way out. Everybody started shooting, so I blasted my way out of there.
Wake me up before you go. Don't leave me hanging on like a yo-yo. Wake me up before you go. I don't wanna miss when you hit that high.
What makes genre kind of a weird way to classify films if it's your only real means of classification is that some genres are defined by formal qualities, like the musical, and some by narrative qualities. Many use both. Genre definitions are inherently kind of murky. They also ignore a lot of important aspects of films, like technology at the time, cultural climate, political subtext, country of origin, and the like. Classifications that some people might think of as genre, like film noir or documentary, could be seen instead as a cycle and a mode of filmmaking, respectively. Even if you're not super familiar with film noir, you're probably familiar with its aesthetic and tone from cultural osmosis and parody.
You say the lights went out? That light was joy. And it's getting snuffed out all over the city, dragging us all into a sea of blackness.
Can we go, you're gramified for really bringing us down?
No, keep talking.
I, personally, am in the cycle camp. Film noir, to me, is a specific title given by French critics to dark, morally ambiguous American films that were a cultural reaction to World War II's devastation and uncertainty. But film historians and academics still, in 2015, argue over exactly what film noir is. To be fair, my favorite film that's referred to as film noir, The Third Man, is British. So when you're defining a film, rather than using broad, easy, and sometimes inaccurate categories, you might want to instead look at its form, its content, and its context. When I talked about French New Wave formal techniques in the first episode, I was talking about stuff like jump cuts, an aesthetic born of using cheap film stock, usually reserved for still photography, and using available natural lighting, stuff like that. But the French New Wave was a film movement that was defined by way more than the formal techniques that it used. It was a rebellion, a burst of creativity, a bunch of people obsessed with movies getting fed up and realizing that they could do better. It was overtly political, and its films were not at all united by genre. And if you were just looking at American versus foreign for your films, French New Wave movies would be lumped in with innumerable films that they wouldn't really have anything in common with. Like, okay, broadly speaking, an American film is probably going to be different in some ways from a film from any other country. Some countries are more open to public funding of certain films because of their perceived cultural significance, so less small art films have to struggle to find investors. On the other hand, censorship in some countries is so strict that the content of films produced in those countries is much more limited than in films produced elsewhere. Each country developed its own filmmaking tradition over time, and each filmmaking tradition developed within that country's unique culture. But the foreign label is still reductive. Not only does it create a weird, unnecessary US-centric dichotomy between American films and literally every other film ever, but each individual director is going to have their own technique and personality that sets them apart. If you look at Akira Kurosawa's meticulous humanist drama versus Takashi Miike's dark humor and violence, or John Woo's action splendor versus Wong Kar-wai's vivid art films, or heartbreaking and resonant Italian neo-realist films versus flashy, gory giallo versus the spaghetti western, it's really easy to see that all of these films do not for 1 second belong on the same shelf. Similarly to how I know people who don't want to touch anything that has subtitles, I still talk to people who see all black and white movies or older movies as boring or essentially the same. But you have early silent film, like way before conventions of editing and other aspects of film form were really even established. Later silent film with its standouts and stars and genres. Then film in the 40s and 50s and all of the massive cultural shifts during that time period. And all of what Hollywood did in a panic to try to fight the rising power of TV, including weird, attention-seeking gimmicks. And on top of this, you have films that were more commercial versus more strange and experimental, films from different countries and different personalities within those countries, American films before and after Hays Code censorship, films during the Red Scare and blacklisting, and works by early black and female directors in the same decades Nazi and racist propaganda were being made. There is a huge and fascinating spectrum there. No film exists in a vacuum, and no film worth watching can be summed up by a simple 1 or 2 word label. If you only watch films from one category, and if you use categories that totally ignore some of the most important aspects of films, then you'll never really be able to appreciate the medium. Over the next couple episodes, I want to talk about specific film movements, specific directors, and auteur theory in general. If you have the means, please consider supporting this channel on Patreon. Thanks!